So to wrap up this Landlord and Tenant Act, so what is the underlying purpose? Obviously to simplify, clarify, modernize, and revise the rental law. Y'all, more specifically, y'all, to try to simplify and clarify. That's the main thing we're trying to do. Obviously, encourage landlords and tenants to maintain and improve the quality of housing, and then to make uniform the law among adopting states. So again, this is the national version to try to make it a little somewhat uniform nationwide. But just know when we get into the state specific portion, we're going to be talking about your specific state and what additional requirements exist between the Landlord and Tenant Act. But then really just kind of understanding some key elements within this law. I was talking about separation of rents and the obligations by the parties. And, this kind of, I don't understand how you have these slumlords you hear about all the time. That landlords don't maintain the property. I'm not sure how they get away with it, to be honest with you, because the law's pretty clear. One, it says rental agreements cannot permit the rent collection without the landlord complying with maintenance duties. So, landlord, if you're not going to maintain the property, you cannot demand rent. The law says you must maintain the property, right? And we talked about some of those maintenance duties. Going to touch on some of them again real quick, but it says it prevents the landlord from avoiding responsibility of habitability. You got to make the property habitable. You got to maintain the property. And if you don't, you cannot expect the tenant to have to pay rent if you're not going to maintain it. Okay? So again, what are those landlord duties? Most of this, if not all of it, we've already touched on, but just a real quick review to wrap things up. Landlord must comply with health and safety codes. Got to keep that property habitable, right? Maintain it. Got to maintain common areas. Maintain facilities in a safe working order. Provide for the waste removal. Talking about the garbage and stuff. And then must supply running water, hot water, and reasonable amounts of heat. I don't think that's asking too much of a landlord. But if you think that's too much, then obviously you shouldn't be a landlord. But then when it comes to the agreements on maintenance, what we're talking about here, in some cases, if the landlord and the tenant agree, they can move some of these maintenance requirements that typically would belong to the landlord. They could put it on the tenant in some cases, and only if the tenant agrees. So let's see what requirements are. For a single family home, the tenant may agree to perform certain duties, to maintenance duties. So if you got a handyman, for a tenant, those are always awesome to have. They can do certain things on their own. As long as the tenant would agree to do that and take on that responsibility, they can do it. Got to be in writing, and there must be that consent, but you can do it. The landlord cannot force the tenant to do it. Again, there must be consent and agreed to in writing. But with multi-unit dwellings, it says the tenant may agree if, again, the agreement is in writing, it's in good faith, and with consideration, typically meaning compensation. You got to pay the tenant to do certain things. But it can't be things that would be due to code noncompliance. When you get into trying to repair code violations or code issues, that's typically going to require a licensed contractor. And a lot of times tenants may not be licensed contractors. So, you can do little things, like, plumbing, if they know, if they do actually understand and know something about plumbing, and they can repair that. then so be it. But when you get into some of the bigger things like code noncompliance, you can't do that. Says the agreement does not affect the obligations to other tenants, right? So you got to take care of all tenants. And the landlord cannot make these agreements a rental condition. So again, it has to be agreed upon by both parties, and it should be in writing for sure, whatever that maintenance requirement would be. And then what are the tenant's duties? Again, we've pretty much talked about these. Common sense. Must comply with building and housing codes. They got to keep the property safe and clean. Must dispose of their trash. Maintain fixtures. Use the facilities reasonably. Y'all don't wear it out, right? You got to maintain the property. Do not intentionally damage property. And we say intentionally, if you're just being careless, that's intentional. You just don't care. It's not my property, not my problem. You won't be here long, not if you were my tenant, but you must avoid damaging the property. And then make sure that there's still peaceful enjoyment for other neighbors. You don't want to be interfering with other neighbors' right to quiet enjoyment. Don't be throwing parties. If you have company over, you're responsible for that company. Don't allow your guests to be interfering with neighbors and stuff like that. But again, all of this, really all of it, is pretty much just common sense the way I see it. So I don't see this to be very difficult at all. But that's your URLTA. And again, there are other usually there are other state requirements, additional ones. And we're going to talk about those when we get into the state specific portion coming up soon.